She always chose the last bench near the window, not because she could not see the board, but because it was the one place where no one really noticed her. From there, she could look outside at the trees moving in the wind and imagine melodies in her head, while the rest of the class laughed, talked, and lived loudly. She was not the kind of student teachers usually praised. She was quiet. She did her work on time. She never caused trouble. But she also never raised her hand too high or spoke too long. When attendance was called, her voice was soft but clear. After that, she disappeared into silence again. Some teachers believed silence meant weakness. They thought confidence only came in loud voices and bold answers. When class discussions happened, other students rushed to speak. She waited. Sometimes she knew the answer. Sometimes she had better ideas. But by the time she gathered the courage, someone else had already spoken. It slowly became normal for teachers to overlook her. One afternoon, the principal announced that the school would hold its annual talent showcase. It was a big event. Parents would attend. There would be singing, dancing, drama, and music performances. The teachers were excited because it was a chance to show how talented their students were. In her heart, something moved. Music had always lived inside her quietly. It was not something she spoke about in school. It felt too personal, too important to be laughed at. But when she heard the word music, her fingers gently pressed against her desk as if touching invisible piano keys. After the announcement, students gathered in small groups, excitedly discussing what they would perform. Some girls planned a dance routine. A group of boys talked about forming a band. Laughter filled the classroom. She stayed in her seat, listening. Finally, she stood up and walked slowly toward the music teacher's desk. Her steps were careful, almost unsure. The teacher was writing something in a notebook and barely looked up. "Yes?" the teacher asked. She swallowed softly. I would like to sign up for the piano performance." The teacher paused, then looked at her properly for the first time that day. There was surprise in that look. Not the good kind. "You play piano?" the teacher asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," she answered quietly. "How long have you been learning?" She hesitated. She did not attend any big music academy. She had never entered competitions. "For some time," she replied. A small laugh escaped from another teacher sitting nearby. "We don't even have regular piano classes here," that teacher said lightly. "Are you sure you don't want to try something simpler?" A few students who were close enough overheard. They turned to look. Her cheeks grew warm. She felt their eyes on her. "I can play," she said, barely above a whisper. The music teacher sighed. "This showcase is important. We can't risk poor performances. It's not practice. It's in front of everyone." The words were not shouted. They were not cruel in tone. But they carried doubt. Clear doubt. Another soft laugh came. "Sometimes students get overconfident," the other teacher added. "Maybe focus on your studies. That suits you better." The students nearby giggled quietly. She stood there for a moment that felt much longer than it really was. Her hands felt cold. She wanted to explain. She wanted to say that she had been practicing for years. That music was the only thing she felt truly good at. That the piano keys felt like home under her fingers. But the words stayed inside. "Please," she said finally, "just give me a chance to audition." The music teacher looked at her for a few seconds. Perhaps it was the calmness in her voice. Perhaps it was curiosity. "Fine," the teacher said. "You can audition. But don't expect special treatment." She nodded. "Thank you." As she walked back to her seat, she could feel whispers following her. "Since when does she play piano? I've never seen her perform anything." "This will be interesting," someone said, trying not to laugh. She kept her eyes on the floor until she reached her desk. The rest of the day felt longer than usual. Every small mistake she made in class felt bigger. When she mispronounced one word while reading aloud, a few students smiled knowingly, as if confirming their doubts about her. But inside her, something stronger than embarrassment was growing. That evening, she returned home to a small house at the edge of town. The walls were simple. The furniture was old but clean. In one corner of the living room stood an upright piano. Its wood was slightly scratched. Some keys had lost their shine. But to her, it was the most beautiful object in the world. It had once belonged to a distant relative who no longer needed it. When it was brought into the house years ago, most people thought it would just collect dust. But not her. She placed her school bag down and walked straight to the piano. Before playing, she closed her eyes for a moment. The laughter from school echoed faintly in her memory. The doubtful expressions. The raised eyebrows. Then she pressed the first key. A soft note filled the room. Her fingers began moving slowly at first, warming up with scales she had practiced hundreds of times. Then the music grew deeper. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing became steady. Here, she was not the quiet girl from the last bench. Here she was confident. Her mother watched from the kitchen doorway. She had heard her daughter play many times, late at night after finishing homework, early in the morning before school. She knew the dedication behind every note. "Something happened at school?" her mother asked gently. She kept playing for a few more seconds before answering. "There's a talent show. And I signed up for piano." Her mother paused. "That's good. They don't think I can do it." The words were simple, honest, not angry, not dramatic. Her mother walked closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do you think you can?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." "Then that's enough." Those words stayed with her. For years, she had practiced without an audience. She learned by watching free videos online, replaying difficult parts again and again until her fingers understood what her mind wanted. Sometimes she made mistakes. Sometimes she cried quietly when a piece felt too hard. But she never stopped. Music was never about showing off. It was about feeling. About expressing things she could not say out loud. Back at school, the days leading to the audition passed quickly. Some students practiced openly in classrooms and hallways. They wanted attention. They wanted praise before even performing. She practiced quietly at home. However, the whispers did not stop. "Are you ready for your big concert?" one student asked with a teasing smile. "Don't forget to bow dramatically," another joked. She responded with small smiles, refusing to argue. One afternoon, she overheard two teachers talking in the corridor. "I hope she doesn't embarrass herself," one said. "It will be a lesson for her," the other replied. Sometimes students need to understand their limits. She walked past them silently, pretending not to hear, but every word sank deep inside her. That night, she practiced longer than usual. Her fingers ached slightly, but she did not stop. She focused on one particular piece, one that carried emotion from beginning to end. It was not the easiest piece. It required control, timing, and feeling. She chose it not to impress. She chose it because it felt true. As audition day approached, her nervousness grew. Not because she doubted her ability, but because she knew how easily people judged what they did not expect. Still, every time doubt tried to enter her mind, she returned to the piano. And every time she played, the doubt became quieter. In school, she was still the quiet girl in the last bench. But something had changed. Now, when the teachers glanced at her with uncertainty, she did not lower her eyes immediately. She simply looked back calmly. They saw silence. They did not see the strength building behind it. And soon they would. The house was always quiet in the evenings. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, but the soft kind that wrapped around the walls like a blanket. After dinner, when the dishes were washed and the lights were dimmed, she would walk to the corner of the living room where the old piano stood. The piano was not perfect. A few keys were slightly heavier than the others. One note sounded a little dull. The wood had faded over the years. But none of that mattered to her. When she sat on the small wooden stool and placed her fingers on the keys, it felt like sitting in front of something alive. She did not have a professional teacher. She never attended expensive music classes. Everything she knew came from patience, repetition, and countless hours of practice. She had started years ago by copying simple melodies she heard online. At first, her fingers moved slowly, unsure of where to go. Sometimes she pressed the wrong keys and winced at the sharp sound. but she kept going. She remembered the first time she managed to play a full song without stopping. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like climbing a mountain. That small success had been enough to keep her going. Now, with the audition only days away, her practice sessions were more focused than ever. She had chosen a piece that was emotional and deep. It began softly, almost like a whisper, then slowly built into something powerful. Every part of it meant something to her. She did not just memorize the notes. She tried to understand them. When she played the first section, she imagined the feeling of being ignored in class. The quiet frustration of knowing she had answers but not being heard. When the music grew stronger, she thought about the courage it took to stand in front of her teachers and ask for a chance. And when the melody softened again, she remembered the calm voice of her mother saying, "Do you think you can?" Each note carried a memory. Some nights, she practiced until her fingers felt sore. Her mother would gently remind her not to overwork herself. "You still have school tomorrow," her mother would say from the doorway. "Just one more time," she would reply. One more time often turned into 5. At school, the atmosphere around the talent showcase was getting louder. Posters were being hung on walls. Students rehearsed in empty classrooms. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Excitement filled the air. She walked through it all quietly. A group of girls were practicing a dance routine near the staircase. As she passed by, one of them stopped and looked at her. "Hey, piano girl," the girl called out playfully. "Ready to surprise us?" There was teasing in her voice, but not pure cruelty. More like curiosity mixed with doubt. She gave a small nod. "I'll try my best. Make sure you don't freeze on stage," another girl added, half joking. She smiled politely and continued walking. Inside, her heart beat a little faster. Freezing on stage. The thought had crossed her mind many times. What if her fingers trembled? What if she forgot a section? What if the teachers looked at each other with that same doubtful expression again? Fear tried to grow inside her. That afternoon, she went to the music room during lunch break. The room was empty except for the piano placed near the window. Sunlight touched the keys gently. She stood there for a moment before sitting down. This piano felt different from the one at home. The keys were smoother. The sound was clearer. She pressed one key lightly. The note echoed beautifully in the quiet room. Her fingers hesitated. Then she began. At first, the music sounded small in the large space. The empty chairs seemed to listen. The walls reflected every tiny mistake. She stopped halfway through the first attempt. Her breathing felt uneven. She closed her eyes and tried again. This time, she imagined the room full of people. She imagined the teachers sitting in the front row with their evaluation sheets. She imagined the whispers. Her fingers trembled slightly. She stopped again. For a few seconds, frustration filled her chest. She was confident at home. Why did this feel different? Because this room held judgment. She took a deep breath and placed her hands back on the keys. "Don't think about them," she whispered to herself. "Just think about the music." She started again, but this time she focused only on the sound. The rise and fall of the melody. The feeling behind it. Slowly, her breathing matched the rhythm. The notes flowed more smoothly. By the time she reached the final part, her fingers were steady. When the last note faded, she realized someone had entered the room. She turned quickly. It was one of the teachers who had laughed earlier. The teacher stood near the door, arms crossed. It was hard to read the expression on their face. "You're practicing," the teacher said. "Yes," she replied softly, standing up from the stool. The teacher walked closer to the piano. "You seem serious about this." "I am." There was a short silence. "Well," the teacher said finally, "audition day is tomorrow. Be prepared." The tone was neutral, not mocking, not encouraging either. She nodded. "I will." As the teacher left, her heart pounded. She wasn't sure how much of the performance had been heard. She wasn't sure what the teacher thought. But something felt slightly different. The laughter was gone. That evening at home, she practiced again. This time, she did not focus only on technical perfection. She practiced performing. She imagined standing up after finishing and facing an audience. She practiced controlling her breathing before starting. Her younger siblings sat on the floor nearby, listening quietly. "You look different when you play," the child said suddenly. "Different how?" she asked. "Like you're not shy anymore." She paused. Maybe that was true. When she played, she was not afraid of making noise. The music allowed her to speak loudly without using words. Later that night, as she lay in bed, sleep did not come easily. Her mind replayed possible mistakes. A missed note, a sudden pause, a memory slip. Then she remembered something important. All those years of practice had not been for this one audition. They had been for herself. The audition was just a moment. The music was much bigger than that. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside was still pale. She sat at the piano one last time before school and played the opening section slowly, carefully. Her mother watched silently. "Are you nervous?" her mother asked. "A little. That means you care." She smiled faintly. At school, the tension was noticeable. Students waiting for auditions sat outside the music room, holding papers or humming softly. Some looked confident. Others looked worried. She took a seat at the end of the bench, away from the loud conversations. Two boys nearby were discussing their guitar performance. "Don't mess up the solo," one said jokingly. "Don't worry about her," the other replied quietly, glancing in her direction. "I don't think she'll be competition." The words were not meant for her ears, but she heard them clearly. For a brief moment, doubt tried to rise again. Then she remembered the countless nights, the sore fingers, the quiet living room, the way the music felt under her hands. She was not here to compete. She was here to play. Her name was called from inside the room. Her heart skipped once. She stood up slowly. The hallway suddenly felt longer than usual. Each step toward the door felt heavy but determined. As she reached for the handle, she paused for just a second. This was the moment everything led to. Not the applause, not the approval, just the chance. She opened the door and stepped inside, carrying years of quiet practice with her. The music room felt smaller than usual when she stepped inside. Maybe it was because 3 teachers were sitting behind a long table near the front. Sheets of paper were spread out in front of them. Pens rested in their hands. The piano stood in the center of the room, quiet and waiting. The door closed softly behind her. For a moment, no one spoke. One teacher glanced at the list and then looked up. "You may begin when you're ready," the teacher said in a calm, official tone. She nodded. Her legs felt slightly weak as she walked toward the piano. The sound of her own footsteps seemed louder than normal. She could feel the teacher's eyes following her. Not warmly, not harshly, just carefully. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. Her fingers rested on her lap for a second. She took a slow breath in and then out, just like she had practiced at home. "This is just music," she told herself. Just music. But it didn't feel like just music. It felt like judgment, like a test not only of skill but of belief. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. For a split second, fear whispered inside her mind. What if the first note comes out wrong? What if her hands shake? Then she pressed the first key. A soft, clear sound filled the room. The second note followed. Then the third. The opening was gentle, almost fragile. The melody moved slowly, like a quiet conversation. Her hands were steady, though her heart was beating fast. One of the teachers looked down at the paper, ready to write something. Another leaned back slightly in the chair. She kept playing. As she reached the next section, the music began to grow stronger. Her fingers moved with more confidence now. She was no longer thinking about the teachers. She was thinking about the story inside the piece. The quiet struggle, the rising courage. The notes flowed into each other smoothly. Her shoulders slowly relaxed. The nervous shaking in her hands disappeared. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the room. It was no longer small. Halfway through the performance, something shifted. One of the teachers stopped writing. Another teacher looked up fully, eyes focused not on the paper, but on her hands moving across the keys. She didn't notice at first. She was too lost in the music. The stronger part of the piece arrived. Her fingers moved faster now, pressing the keys with control and emotion. It was not just technical skill. It was feeling. Each note carried something real. Her back was straight, her head slightly lowered. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply playing. In that moment, the quiet girl from the last bench disappeared. In her place was someone confident. Someone who belonged exactly where she was. A teacher exchanged a quick glance with another. There was no laughter now. The final section approached. The music softened again, returning to a calm but powerful ending. Her touch on the keys became gentle, almost delicate. She allowed each note to breathe before moving to the next. The room was completely silent except for the piano. When she reached the last note, she let it ring. She did not rush to stand up. She let the sound fade naturally into the air. And then it was over. Her hands slowly lifted from the keys and returned to her lap. Silence. Not awkward silence. Deep silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. She felt her heart pounding again. Doubt tried to creep back in. Maybe she imagined the change. Maybe it wasn't good enough. Then one teacher cleared their throat softly. "Thank you," the teacher said. The tone was different from before. No sarcasm. No doubt. Another teacher looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "How long have you been playing?" the teacher asked. She hesitated slightly. "A few years." "With a teacher?" She shook her head. "Mostly by myself." There was a pause. The teachers exchanged another glance. This time it wasn't dismissive. It was surprised. "You may step outside while we discuss," the first teacher said. She stood up carefully, her legs slightly shaky again now that the music had ended. She gave a small nod and walked toward the door. As she stepped out into the hallway, the noise from outside returned. Students were sitting on benches, waiting for their turns. Some looked up at her immediately. "Well?" someone whispered. She gave a small shrug. "I played." "That's it?" another asked. She nodded and sat down quietly at the end of the bench again. Inside the room, muffled voices could be heard. She couldn't make out the words. Her mind replayed the performance. Did she rush the middle section? Was the ending too soft? Did she miss any notes? She searched her memory carefully. No, it had felt right. A few minutes later, the door opened. Her name was called again. Her heart jumped. She stood and walked back inside. The teachers looked more serious now, but not cold. "We have decided," one began, "that you will be part of the final showcase." For a second, the words didn't fully register. "I will?" she asked softly. "Yes," the teacher confirmed. "You have strong control and emotion in your playing. We would like you to perform that same piece on the event night." Relief rushed through her chest so quickly it almost made her dizzy. "Thank you," she said quietly. One teacher adjusted their glasses. "However," they added, "the stage environment will be different. Larger audience. Brighter lights. You must practice performing with confidence." "I will," she replied. As she walked out of the room again, the hallway felt different. The same students were there. The same walls. The same benches. But something had changed. "What happened?" someone asked immediately. "I got selected," she answered simply. There was a short silence. "You did?" one student said, surprised. She nodded. The whispers that followed were not mocking this time. They were confused, curious. "I didn't know she could actually play," someone muttered. Neither did they. She returned to her classroom feeling lighter. Not proud in a loud way. Not dramatic. Just steady. Later that afternoon, one of the teachers who had doubted her earlier stopped her in the corridor. "I heard you did well," the teacher said. She looked up. "I tried my best." The teacher studied her face for a moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Keep practicing," the teacher said finally. "The showcase is important." There was no apology, but there was no laughter either. When she returned home that evening, her mother noticed the difference immediately. "You got in," her mother said before she even spoke. She smiled. Yes. Her mother hugged her tightly. But even in that happy moment, she knew something important. The audition was only the beginning. The real test would be on the stage in front of everyone. In front of the same teachers. In front of the students who had whispered. That night, she sat at the piano again. This time, when her fingers touched the keys, there was no fear. Only focus. She had been given a chance. And she was not going to waste it. The day of the showcase arrived faster than she expected. All week, the school had been buzzing with excitement. Posters were taped neatly along the hallways. Chairs were arranged in the large assembly hall. A temporary stage had been set up with bright lights pointing toward the center. The piano had been moved carefully from the music room and placed under those lights, polished and ready. From the morning itself, there was a different kind of energy in the air. Students were dressed better than usual. Some carried costume bags. Others walked around practicing their lines or humming their songs one last time. Teachers moved back and forth, checking lists, adjusting decorations, making sure everything looked perfect. She arrived quietly, just like always. But today, her quietness felt different. It was not about hiding. It was about staying calm. She wore a simple but neat outfit. Nothing flashy. Nothing dramatic. Her hair was tied back neatly. When she entered the hall for the final sound check, she saw the stage lights glowing softly, even though the audience had not yet arrived. For a moment, she just stood there and looked at the piano. It looked bigger on stage. A teacher noticed her and walked over. "You'll perform in the second half," the teacher said. "Be ready." She nodded. Yes. The hours before the event felt slow and fast at the same time. She sat backstage on a chair, listening to the muffled sounds of the growing audience. Parents were entering. Students were laughing. The microphone was being tested again and again. Her hands felt slightly cold. She rubbed them together gently. Other performers around her were talking nervously. "I hope I don't forget my steps. I think I'll just look at the back wall and not at the crowd. What if I mess up?" She listened quietly. She understood their fear. She felt it too. When the program finally began, the principal gave a short welcome speech. Applause filled the hall. The first few performances went smoothly. A dance group received loud cheers. A singer impressed the audience with a powerful voice. Backstage, she waited. Every time someone finished performing, applause echoed through the hall. Each round of clapping made her heart beat faster. Then she heard her name announced. For a split second, everything around her felt distant. "This is it," she whispered to herself. She stood up slowly. Her legs felt light but steady. As she walked toward the side of the stage, she could see the bright lights shining. The hall beyond them looked dark because of the strong stage lighting, but she could sense the large audience sitting there. She stepped onto the stage. For a brief moment, the applause that welcomed her sounded polite but unsure. Some students recognized her and whispered to each other, "That's her. The quiet one. She's really performing?" She heard none of it clearly. The lights were too bright. The stage felt warm. She walked toward the piano calmly and sat down on the bench. From where she sat, she could see the front row faintly. Teachers were seated there, including the ones who had once doubted her. Their faces were serious, watching carefully. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She placed her hands on her lap and took a slow breath. "Don't think about them. Think about the music." The hall slowly became quiet. She lifted her hands and placed her fingers on the keys. For a second, the silence felt heavy. Thousands of thoughts tried to enter her mind at once. What if she makes a mistake? What if her hands shake? What if they laugh again? Then she pressed the first note. The sound echoed clearly through the microphone and speakers, filling the large hall. It was softer than the dance music before, but it carried weight. The second note followed. Then the third. The opening melody moved gently, like a calm river. Her fingers felt steady, just as they had at home. The fear that had been sitting in her chest slowly began to loosen. The audience grew quiet. No whispers now. As the music continued, She allowed herself to sink into it completely. The stage lights disappeared from her awareness. The crowd disappeared. The only thing that existed was the piano beneath her hands. When she reached the middle section, the music began to grow stronger. Her fingers moved faster, confidently. The sound became fuller, richer. The hall, which had been filled with noise earlier, was now completely still. In the front row, one teacher leaned slightly forward. Another stopped adjusting papers and simply watched. She did not see their reactions clearly, but she felt the shift in the room. The energy had changed. The stronger notes echoed powerfully. Her hands moved across the keyboard smoothly, without hesitation. Every practice session at home, every late night, every repeated mistake had led to this moment. She was not rushing. She was not holding back. She was playing with her whole heart. As the final section approached, the music softened again. It became delicate, almost fragile. Her touch on the keys grew lighter. The powerful middle faded into a gentle ending. The hall was so quiet that even the smallest note could be heard clearly. Her breathing matched the rhythm. Calm, controlled. She pressed the final note and allowed it to ring. The sound floated in the air for a few seconds. Then silence. A deep, stunned silence. For a moment, she wondered if something had gone wrong. The pause felt long. And then, suddenly, applause exploded through the hall. Not polite applause. Not uncertain applause. Loud, powerful clapping. Some students stood up. Parents joined in. The sound filled the entire space. Her heart almost stopped in surprise. She slowly stood up from the bench and turned toward the audience. The bright lights made it hard to see faces clearly, but she could hear the appreciation. In the front row, the teachers were clapping too. Not out of duty, but sincerely. She gave a small bow, her hands still slightly trembling. Not from fear now, but from emotion. As she walked off the stage, the applause continued. Backstage, the other performers stared at her. "That was amazing," one whispered. "I didn't know you could play like that," another said, eyes wide. She smiled shyly. "Thank you." Her chest felt light, almost unreal. The same stage that had scared her minutes ago now felt like a place where she belonged. One of the teachers approached her backstage. It was the same one who had once suggested she focus only on studies. "You surprised us," the teacher said quietly. She lowered her eyes respectfully. "I just played what I practiced." The teacher nodded slowly. It was more than practice. There was no sarcasm in the voice this time, only honesty. Later, when the entire event ended and students gathered in groups to talk, many came up to her. "You were the best performance tonight. Your music gave me chills. How long have you been hiding that talent?" She did not know how to answer that last question. She had never hidden it. No one had asked. As she walked home with her family after the event, the night air felt cool and calm. The noise of applause still echoed faintly in her ears. Her mother looked at her with quiet pride. "You did more than play music tonight," her mother said softly. She looked up. "What do you mean?" "You showed them who you are." She thought about those words carefully. For years, she had been the quiet girl in the back row. The one teachers overlooked. The one classmates barely noticed. Tonight they had seen her. Not because she spoke loudly, but because she let her music speak. And for the first time, the silence that once made her invisible had turned into something powerful. The morning after the showcase felt different the moment she walked through the school gates. Usually, she entered quietly, blending into the crowd without anyone noticing. But today, as soon as she stepped into the hallway, she felt eyes on her. Not mocking eyes, curious ones. A group of students standing near the notice board paused mid-conversation when they saw her. One of them smiled. "Hey," a girl said, almost shyly. "You were amazing last night." She stopped for a second, surprised by the warmth in the voice. "Thank you," she replied softly. As she walked further down the corridor, more students greeted her. Some gave her thumbs up. Others simply nodded with respect. It wasn't loud attention, but it was real. Inside the classroom, the atmosphere felt lighter. The same desks, the same walls, the same sunlight coming through the windows. But something had shifted. She walked to her usual seat at the back near the window. Before she could sit down, one of the girls who usually sat in the front row turned around. "Why didn't you ever tell us you could play like that?" she asked. She shrugged gently. "No one asked." The girl looked thoughtful. "Still, that was really brave." Brave. She had never thought of it that way. To her, it had simply been necessary. When the first teacher entered the room, the class grew quiet. The teacher placed books on the desk and looked around the room. Then the teacher's eyes stopped on her. For those who attended the showcase, the teacher began, "You witnessed something special." A few students smiled and glanced at her. "Talent is not always loud," the teacher continued. "Sometimes it sits quietly, waiting for a chance." The words hung in the air. She lowered her eyes, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. The teacher then looked directly at her. "Well done." It was simple, just 2 words, but they carried more weight than all the earlier doubts combined. Later that day, during break time, she walked past the music room. The door was open. The music teacher stood inside, organizing sheets of paper. "Can you come in for a moment?" the teacher called. She stepped inside calmly. The teacher looked at her for a few seconds, as if choosing the right words. "I owe you something," the teacher said finally. She blinked in surprise. "You don't owe me anything." The teacher sighed softly. "I misjudged you." There it was, clear and direct. "I assumed you weren't ready. I assumed you didn't have enough experience. That was my mistake." She didn't know what to say at first. She had imagined this moment many times, but now that it was happening, it felt different. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. "I just wanted a chance," she replied quietly. "And you made the most of it," the teacher said. There was a pause. Then the teacher added, "If you're interested, I can help you prepare for bigger competitions. With proper training, you could go far." The idea felt both exciting and overwhelming. "I would like that," she said softly. As she left the music room, her heart felt full, not because someone had apologized, but because someone finally believed. But not everyone's reaction was perfect. In the afternoon, she overheard 2 students whispering near the staircase. "It was probably just one good performance," one said. "Yeah, maybe she got lucky," the other replied. The words stung slightly. For a moment, the old feeling of being doubted returned. But this time it didn't feel as heavy. She had already proven something important, not to them but to herself. Luck did not practice for years. Luck did not sit alone every night repeating difficult sections again and again. Luck did not push through fear under bright stage lights. She continued walking without reacting. That evening at home, she sat at the piano again. The applause from the night before still echoed faintly in her memory, but she did not let it distract her. She played the same piece once more. This time it felt calmer. The pressure was gone. She wasn't playing to prove anything anymore. She was playing because she loved it. Her mother sat nearby, listening with a gentle smile. "Things are different at school now?" her mother asked. "A little," she replied. "In a good way?" She thought about it. "Yes, but I don't want it to change me." Her mother nodded. "It won't. Not if you remember why you started." That night, she thought deeply about everything that had happened. The laughter, the doubt, the silence, the applause. What stayed with her the most was not the clapping. It was the moment in the audition room when the teachers stopped writing and simply listened. That had been the real turning point. The following days continued to bring small changes. A few students asked her for advice about music. One even asked if she could teach them some basic notes after school. She agreed. Sitting beside someone else at the piano felt strange at first. She wasn't used to explaining what had always felt natural to her. But as she guided the student through simple scales, she realized something important. She had learned not just how to play. She had learned how to persist. One afternoon, during a class discussion, the teacher asked a question. Usually, she would have stayed quiet. But this time, she raised her hand. The movement felt small but powerful. When the teacher called on her, she answered clearly. Her voice did not shake. The class listened. It wasn't about music anymore. It was about confidence. The teachers, too, seemed different around her. They looked at her with more attention now. Not because she had become someone new, but because they had finally noticed who she had always been. A week after the showcase, the principal announced that a short video of her performance would be shared on the school's official page. Applause followed the announcement. She felt nervous again, but in a different way. Being seen was new, but she reminded herself of something important. She had never played for attention. She had played because it made her feel alive. One evening, as she sat by the window in her room, she thought about how close she had been to giving up before even trying. If she had listened to the laughter, if she had accepted the doubt as truth, none of this would have happened. The teachers who once mocked her now greeted her with respect. The students who once whispered now spoke kindly. But the biggest change had happened inside her. She no longer felt invisible, not because others were watching, but because she had found her voice through music. And even if someday the applause faded, even if people moved on to the next talent, she knew something no one could take away from her. She had faced doubt. She had faced fear. And she had played anyway. Weeks passed after the showcase, but the effect of that night did not fade. Something had changed in the school, and something had changed inside her. At first, the attention felt strange. Students who had never spoken to her before now greeted her in the hallway. Some asked about the song she played. Others wanted to know how long she had been practicing. A few even admitted that they had misjudged her. She listened politely to everyone. She thanked them, but she did not let the praise rise too high inside her heart, because she remembered how quickly opinions can change. One afternoon, the music teacher called her to the music room again. The piano stood in its usual place now, away from the bright stage lights. It looked smaller here but still powerful. "There is an inter-school music competition next month," the teacher said. "I would like you to participate." The words felt heavy. "Me?" she asked quietly. "Yes, you have potential. But this time the audience will be bigger. The judges will be professionals." A month ago, the idea would have terrified her. Now it still scared her, but in a different way. Felt like growth, not pressure. "I will try," she said. The teacher smiled slightly. "Not try, prepare." From that day on, her routine became more structured. After school, she stayed in the music room for extra practice. The teacher guided her on posture, hand movement, and stage presence. Small corrections were made. Tiny improvements were noticed. At home, she practiced even more carefully. She no longer rushed through difficult sections. She paid attention to every detail. Her mother watched her with quiet pride. "You're working harder than ever," her mother said one evening. "I don't want it to be just one good performance," she replied honestly. Her mother nodded. It never was. Meanwhile, at school, the teachers had also changed in small but important ways. In staff meetings, they began discussing how easily quiet students are overlooked. One teacher admitted openly, "We focus too much on the loud ones." Another agreed. Talent doesn't always announce itself. Without meaning to, she had started a conversation bigger than herself. In her classroom, she noticed something else too. A student who was usually silent during lessons began raising a hand more often. Another who used to avoid participating in activities signed up for a small poetry reading event. It was as if her performance had given others permission to step forward. One day, during lunch break, she found a younger student sitting alone near the staircase, looking upset. The girl was holding a notebook filled with drawings. "Are those yours?" she asked gently. The younger student nodded. "But they're not that good." She smiled softly. "Who told you that?" "No one. I just think so." She remembered that feeling clearly. The quiet belief that you are not enough before even trying. "They are good," she said after flipping through a few pages. "But even if they weren't, you can still improve. Don't hide them." The younger student looked up at her with hopeful eyes. In that moment, she understood something deeply. This was never only about piano. It was about courage. As the inter-school competition approached, her schedule grew busier. Some evenings she felt tired. Sometimes her fingers felt sore again, just like in the early days of practice. There were moments when she made mistakes and felt frustrated. One night, after missing the same difficult part several times, she closed the piano lid gently and rested her forehead against it. "Why is this part so hard?" she whispered. Her mother sat beside her. "Because you're growing," her mother said simply. "Hard things mean you're moving forward." She reopened the piano and tried again. At school, the teachers treated her with respect now, but not with special favoritism. And she appreciated that. She didn't want to be placed on a pedestal. She just wanted to be seen fairly. The day of the inter-school competition finally arrived. This time, the venue was larger. Students from different schools filled the seats. Judges sat at a long table near the stage. Backstage, she felt nervous again. The same kind of nervousness she had felt before her first audition. But now she knew something important. Nervous did not mean incapable. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with steady steps. The lights were brighter. The hall was bigger. The faces were unfamiliar. But the piano felt the same. She sat down, took a breath and began. This performance was not about proving anyone wrong. It was not about surprising teachers. It was not about applause. It was about honoring every night she had practiced alone. The music flowed smoothly. There were tiny imperfections, but she did not panic. She kept going. She allowed the emotion to guide her. When she finished, the applause was strong. The judges nodded thoughtfully. Later, when the results were announced, her name was called for second place. For a moment, she froze. Second place. She walked to the stage to receive her certificate. It was not first place, but it was real recognition. When she returned to her seat, she felt something warm in her chest. Not pride in winning, pride in growth. Back at school, the news spread quickly. Teachers congratulated her. Students cheered. The principal mentioned her achievement during assembly. But what mattered most was something quieter. The same teacher who once laughed at her stood beside her after assembly and said softly, "I'm glad you didn't give up when we doubted you." She looked at the teacher calmly. "I'm glad I didn't give up either." There was no bitterness in her voice. No anger. Just truth. As the school year slowly moved toward its end, she continued practicing. Not because of competitions. Not because of attention. But because music was part of her now in a stronger way than ever. She still sat by the window in class sometimes. She was still quiet. She still preferred listening before speaking. But she no longer felt invisible. She had learned that being quiet does not mean being small. And the teachers had learned something too. They learned to pause before judging. They learned to look beyond first impressions. They learned that talent can sit silently in the last row, waiting for one brave moment. On the final day of school, as she packed her books into her bag, she looked around the classroom. This was the same room where laughter once followed her. Now it held respect. She walked past the desks, past the door, into the hallway filled with voices and footsteps. Her journey was not finished. There would be more stages, more challenges, more doubts from the world. But she was no longer afraid of doubt, because she knew something powerful. The world may not see your talent at first. Some may laugh. Some may question. Some may underestimate. But if you keep practicing in the quiet, if you keep believing when no one is watching, one day the music will speak. And when it does, it will not only silence doubt. It will change how you see yourself forever.